Start at the beginning. You are Lori Zanders,
Right.
and what was your childhood like? Where were you born?
Well, my childhood, I was born in a small town in Germany, not far, maybe 3 hours by train from Cologne, a major city in Germany, which is also very famous for its cathedral, which is called the Dome, and is well known to any traveler or almost everybody. I had one brother. He was 3 years older, and early on I lost my father to natural causes at age 11, and my mother took over our business at the time in Arnsberg. That was the name of the town, which was a business that you might call here a haberdashery. And she kept that as long, which was, I think, until 1938, until she was forced to give it up. And of course she had to sell it under duress and got a very minimal price for it. In the meantime, my brother was sent to Holland to go to finish his schooling at a Quaker school in Ommen. It was a small town in the Netherlands, in Holland. Tragically, he stayed there, not tragically, he stayed there until age 18, and by then he had finished his schooling and left for Amsterdam, a major city in Holland. There he was caught in 39-40, soon after by the Nazis, was taken to concentration camp, and at age 19 lost his life there. I, in the meantime, was sent to Cologne, which had a Jewish high school, for me to go on studying. There was a very forward-looking headmaster in that school who, through B'nai Bris Lodge, a worldwide Jewish organization, got a deal, let's say, with various Jewish communities in England to transfer whole groups of children, like a class of children, in the sense of Jewish children in the same age bracket, and they, through B'nai Bris, were sent to England. I went with one of his classes to Manchester, England, where we lived, about 16 girls, in one house with a elderly Jewish couple who took care of us. We, of course, had to help with the housework and the cleaning, and they did mostly of the cooking, but it was strictly Orthodox, which was very strange to me because I come from a very liberal home. I stayed there for about 4 years because in the meantime my mother and stepfather had gotten just a few days before war broke out to Switzerland. And as I always say, Switzerland is a beautiful country, but the Swiss people are not as beautiful as their scenery. They wouldn't let them work. And of course, my parents had very limited funds that they could bring out of Germany. So after their 2 years, they lived in one room with a postal carrier, and after about 2 years, they saw their funds were getting low, so they tried to get out of Europe altogether. And at the time, the only passage they could get was to Ecuador, South America. And that's how they landed in South America. Now, they had a very difficult time there. They were not that young anymore, and they had to find jobs, which in South America, jobs are very low paid. They had to try to create their own business. And they ended up with taking over a store that sold silverware, but it was not, the ordinary silverware, it was a lot of the typical silverware that was produced for tourists, and they made a living out of that. When I joined them before I left England, seeing we were children, we had to be evacuated from Manchester to the seaside, which was called Blackpool, which in England is a very well-known seashore place. And there we stayed with a woman and had very limited everything, food and possibilities in whatever way. We had a choice by then to either learn something like office work, or I chose like more or less dressmaking, because I was quite handy and enjoyed doing needlepoint and stitchery and whatever it was. Anyway, I went into with two older ladies who showed me, who made dresses and coats and so on, and I learned to sew more or less professionally. When I went, I only stayed there, as I said, 4 years, because anybody tried to get out of Europe. We were heavily bombed, especially Manchester, which was a very industrial city, and many, many nights we spent in the air raid shelter and hearing the bombs overhead falling and praying all the time that they wouldn't hit our place or our shelter. It was a difficult use. We had hardly any social life, only among the girls. But when you're young, you don't take these things as serious. We didn't realize how serious it all was than when you're a little older and mature. So I tried to leave from England to South America, and all of a passage I could get, with my parents sending the money, was on a freighter that was also a freezer ship that brought meat from Argentina to England. We hadn't seen a piece of meat or a banana or anything in years. So it was terribly, terribly exciting. We shipped out of, first I think out of Liverpool, but the area was so heavily mined, the waters were so mined, we had to turn back. we shipped out again the next time from further north, I think it was from Scotland, and made it and crossed the ocean, but instead of going through the canal, the Panama Canal, we went south to Argentina, and the ship landed there. I got off and went by road from Buenos Aires across the continent up onto the other side of, I think that's Chile, no? Yeah. And luckily I was young, 18 years old. I was in company of one elderly lady, my mother's age, and two younger girls who were not going to Ecuador but who were going to Bolivia. So we were together for a short time, and then they went a different route. But this lady stayed with me all the time until we crossed, and then from Chile took another ship up north on the western coast of South America to reach Ecuador. And she sort of took care of me because the many men of the officers and the crew, of course, wouldn't give me much peace. Anyway, we made it safe and sound, and were extremely happy when we finally arrived at the port of Ecuador, Guayaquil, and I was received by my mother and father, and she was received by her family. Then we still had to go from Guayaquil to Quito, Ecuador. Quito, Ecuador is the capital of Ecuador, is nearly 10,000 feet high, and at that time, I don't know, probably it was the money or whatever, we didn't fly, we went by train. And the train was, how many hours was that? About 12, 15 hours, something like that. A long, long ride. And then, of course, it stopped in all the small towns, and there the people come to the train and sell their wares and want to sell their sweets and their whatever. It was interesting, but, looking at it now, it was interesting, but at the time it wasn't exactly that was important to us. Anyway, we finally reached Quito, and my parents had a little house there, and I started pretty soon to work for a real nice outfit. Two Jewish men had started a clothing business, and made really excellent quality clothing of all sorts, fancy and not so fancy and so on. So I worked with them for a number of years, and after I had been in Ecuador, in Quito, only a few days, my mother said to me, you know what, there is an organization which you might have heard of here in America. It's called HIAS. Does any ring a bell? No, not really. Anyway, this was a Jewish organization that arranged the papers for me to come into the country and be able to stay. And there were 3 older gentlemen there at the office, and my mother thought it would be nice if I go up to them and thank them for all the work they did with my papers and so on. And among these gentlemen, who were of course volunteers, was one gentleman who became to be my father-in-law.